My name is Lily Parker, and when I was 11 years old, I learned a painful lesson that most children should never have to learn. Just because your parents provide you with a beautiful house doesn't mean they make you feel at home. From the outside, my family looked perfect. My father owned a successful investment firm in Chicago. My mother was a well-known socialite who spent most of her time organizing charity galas, attending exclusive events, and posting glamorous photos online. We lived in a massive house in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. People envied us. Our neighbors admired us. My parents loved reminding everyone how successful they were. But behind the expensive walls and luxury cars was a truth nobody saw. I was invisible. At least, that's how it felt. My parents weren't cruel. They weren't abusive. They simply didn't seem interested in being parents. My father was always working. My mother was always busy. If they weren't traveling, they were attending parties. If they weren't attending parties, they were planning vacations. And somehow, there was never enough time left for me. As a child, I tried everything to get their attention. I brought home perfect grades. They barely looked at them. I won a school art competition. My mother forgot to attend the ceremony. I scored the winning goal during a soccer game. My father promised he'd come. He never showed up. After a while, disappointment became normal. I stopped expecting them to notice me. It hurt less that way. One evening, about a month before summer break, my parents called me into the dining room. The room was enormous. The crystal chandelier sparkled overhead. A half-finished bottle of expensive wine sat on the table. My mother looked excited. My father looked unusually cheerful. Something was clearly happening. "Lily," my mother said with a smile, "we have wonderful news." I remember feeling hopeful. Maybe they were planning a family vacation. Maybe we would finally spend time together. Maybe they wanted to do something as a family. I was wrong. "We're going to Europe for a month." My father's grin widened. "We'll be visiting France, Italy, Greece, and Spain." My mother immediately pulled out her phone. She started showing photos of luxury hotels and beaches. They talked for nearly 20 minutes about restaurants, shopping districts, and sightseeing plans. The entire time, I waited for them to mention me. They never did. Finally, I asked the obvious question. "What about me?" The room became quiet. My parents exchanged a quick glance. Then my father laughed. As if the answer was obvious. "You'll stay here." I frowned. "With who?" My mother shrugged. "Yourself." I blinked. Certain I had misunderstood. "What do you mean?" "We mean exactly that," my father replied. "You'll be fine." I stared at them. I was 11 years old. Surely they weren't serious. My mother reached into her purse and placed a $20 bill on the table. The green paper slid across the polished wood toward me. "There you go." I looked at the money. Then at her. Then back at the money. "What's this for?" "Food. Anything you need." I laughed nervously. Because it had to be a joke. There was no way my parents thought $20 could last an entire month. And there was definitely no way they planned to leave an 11-year-old alone. Right? My father stood up and straightened his jacket. "You'll be fine." My mother smiled. "You're a smart girl." The conversation ended there. As if everything had been decided. As if what they were doing was completely normal. For the next few days, I convinced myself they were joking. Maybe they had hired a babysitter. Maybe a relative was coming. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. But as departure day arrived, reality became impossible to ignore. Suitcases filled the hallway. Airline confirmations were printed. Taxi reservations were made. Everything was real. The morning they left, my mother kissed the air beside my cheek without actually touching me. My father patted my shoulder. Then they climbed into a black SUV waiting outside. I stood on the front porch watching them leave. The vehicle disappeared around the corner. And just like that, they were gone. No babysitter. No relatives. No neighbors checking in. Nobody. Just me. An 11-year-old girl. A giant empty house. And $20. At first, I stood frozen in the doorway. Certain they would come back. Certain they'd forgotten something. Certain this couldn't actually be happening. But hours passed. Then evening arrived. And for the first time in my life, I realized something terrifying. They weren't coming back. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. For an entire month. I was completely alone. The first night was the worst. After my parents left, the house felt completely different. It was the same house. The same furniture. The same walls. The same expensive decorations. Yet somehow, everything felt colder. Bigger. Emptier. I spent the afternoon convincing myself that everything would be okay. Maybe they would call. Maybe they would realize how crazy this was and come back. Maybe someone would show up. But nobody did. As the sun disappeared and darkness filled the house, I began turning on lights in every room I entered. Not because I needed them. Because I was scared. Every small sound made me jump. The creak of the stairs. The hum of the refrigerator. The wind outside the windows. For the first time in my life, I understood how lonely silence could be. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the front door. Kept looking out the window. Kept hoping to see my parents' car pulling into the driveway. But it never happened. The next morning, reality finally started sinking in. I was alone. Completely alone. And nobody was coming to help. I wandered into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There was food. Not much. A few leftovers. Some fruit. A carton of milk. A loaf of bread. Enough to last several days. But definitely not an entire month. I stared at the $20 bill my mother had left behind. It sat on the kitchen counter like some kind of cruel joke. $20. That was apparently what they believed an 11-year-old needed to survive for 30 days. The thought made my stomach hurt. Over the next few days, I tried to stick to a routine. I woke up. Made breakfast. Watched television. Read books. Did whatever I could to stay busy. But loneliness followed me everywhere. The house felt too large for one person. Every room reminded me how alone I was. At night, I often sat on the living room couch staring at the front door. Waiting. Hoping. Even though I knew better. By the fourth day, the food situation started becoming a problem. The refrigerator looked noticeably emptier. The bread was almost gone. The milk had run out. And I found myself carefully counting every item left in the pantry. For the first time, I began worrying about something I had never worried about before. Food. Meanwhile, my parents seemed to be having the time of their lives. Every few days, my phone buzzed. For a moment, I would get excited. Thinking they were finally checking on me. Thinking they wanted to know if I was okay. But the messages were never about me. Instead, they were vacation photos. My mother standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. My father smiling on a yacht in Greece. Pictures of expensive restaurants. Luxury hotels. Beautiful beaches. One message simply read, "Paris is amazing." Another said, "You would love the view from our balcony." Not once did they ask, "Did you eat today?" Not once did they ask, "Are you okay?" Not once did they ask, "Do you need anything?" It was as if they had completely forgotten I existed. One evening, I finally gathered the courage to call my mother. She answered after several rings. "Lily." Her voice sounded distracted, like she was busy doing something else. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, honey, we're just about to leave for dinner." I hesitated. I was wondering. Before I could finish, I heard laughter in the background. Music. People talking. The sounds of a party. "We'll talk later, okay?" Then she hung up. Just like that. I sat staring at the phone. The call had lasted less than 30 seconds. That was the moment everything changed. Because until then, I had still been waiting for someone to take care of me. Still hoping my parents would suddenly act like parents. Still believing someone would rescue me. But sitting alone in that giant house, holding a silent phone, I finally understood the truth. Nobody was coming. Nobody was going to solve my problems. Nobody was going to save me. If I wanted food, I would have to find a way. If I wanted things to get better, I would have to make them better. For an 11-year-old girl, that realization was terrifying. But it was also the beginning of something important. For the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for my parents. And started depending on myself. I didn't know it yet. But that decision was about to change everything. By the beginning of the second week, I had stopped waiting for my parents to call. I had stopped expecting help. And most importantly, I had stopped believing someone would magically fix my situation. The food in the kitchen was running low. The $20 was almost gone. And for the first time in my 11 years, I had a problem that couldn't be ignored. I needed a way to take care of myself. The question was how. One morning, I stood in front of the refrigerator staring at the few items left inside. Half a carton of eggs. Some butter. A few slices of cheese. That was about it. I sighed and closed the door. Then I noticed a cookbook sitting on a shelf nearby. It belonged to my grandmother. Years ago, she used to bake cookies with me whenever she visited. I hadn't touched the book in ages. Curious, I pulled it down. The pages were worn and stained. Little handwritten notes filled the margins. For some reason, seeing her handwriting made me smile. That afternoon, I tried making scrambled eggs. The first attempt was terrible. I burned them. The second attempt wasn't much better. But eventually, I figured it out. Over the next few days, I learned how to make simple meals. Pancakes. Sandwiches. Soup. Pasta. Nothing fancy. But enough to keep me fed. Each small success made me feel a little stronger. A little more capable. A little less afraid. Still, food wasn't my only problem. Sooner or later, I would need more money. One afternoon, while sitting on the front porch, I noticed my elderly neighbor struggling to carry groceries from her car. Without thinking, I ran over. "Can I help you?" She smiled gratefully. "Oh, thank goodness." The bags were heavier than they looked. But I carried every single one into her kitchen. When I finished, she reached into her purse and handed me $5. I immediately shook my head. "No, that's okay." She gently pushed the money into my hand. "You earned it." I stared at the bill. $5. It wasn't much. But it felt incredible. Because I had earned it myself. The next day, I helped another neighbor pull weeds from her garden. A few days later, I walked someone's dog. Then another. Soon, word started spreading around the neighborhood. The little girl from the big house was willing to help anyone. Dog walking. Carrying groceries. Watering plants. Cleaning patios. Mowing small sections of lawn. Whatever people needed. I said yes. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson from 3 houses down handed me a rake. "You sure you're up for this?" I nodded confidently. 3 hours later, his entire yard was spotless. He looked genuinely impressed. "So you're really doing all this yourself?" "Yes, sir." He studied me for a moment. Then handed me $20. The exact amount my parents had left me with for an entire month. For a second, I almost laughed. Because I had earned in one afternoon what they thought was enough for 30 days. As the weeks passed, more people started noticing. Neighbors would wave when they saw me. They would ask how I was doing. Sometimes they offered extra work. Sometimes they offered advice. Sometimes they simply offered kindness. And honestly, kindness felt just as valuable as money. One Saturday morning, I found myself walking 3 dogs at the same time. A golden retriever. A beagle. And an energetic Labrador that nearly pulled me down the street. Several people laughed as they passed. Not because they were making fun of me. Because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. An 11-year-old girl handling responsibilities that many adults avoided. At first, I was embarrassed by the attention. Then something unexpected happened. I started feeling proud. Proud of the meals I cooked. Proud of the money I earned. Proud of the problems I solved on my own. For years, I had believed I was weak. After all, that's how my parents treated me. Like a child who couldn't do anything without them. But every day proved otherwise. Every challenge I overcame made me stronger. Every small success built confidence. And confidence was something I had never really experienced before. One evening, after finishing a long day of work, I sat on the front porch counting my earnings. The stack of bills wasn't huge. But it was growing. More importantly, I had earned every dollar myself. As the sun set across the neighborhood, I realized something surprising. I wasn't scared anymore. A few weeks earlier, the giant empty house had terrified me. Now it didn't. Because I was changing. Growing. Learning. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was becoming independent. And I had no idea that the small skills I was learning would soon lead me to discover a talent that would change everything. By the 3rd week, something had changed. I was no longer the scared 11-year-old girl standing alone in a giant house. I had learned how to cook. I had learned how to earn money. And most importantly, I had learned how to depend on myself. But I still had no idea that I was about to discover something that would completely change my future. It happened by accident. One rainy afternoon, I was looking through my grandmother's old cookbook again. The same cookbook that had taught me how to make simple meals. As I flipped through the pages, a photograph fell out. It was a picture of my grandmother and me standing in her kitchen. We were both covered in flour. A tray of cookies sat on the counter. I couldn't help smiling. My grandmother had always loved baking. And whenever she visited, she would let me help. For the first time in years, I remembered how much fun it had been. So I decided to try it myself. The recipe looked simple enough. Chocolate chip cookies. What could go wrong? The answer, unfortunately, was almost everything. The first batch was terrible. Some cookies were burned. Others were still half raw. A few looked so strange that even I didn't want to eat them. I laughed at myself. Then I tried again. And again. And again. By the 4th attempt, they actually looked like real cookies. More importantly, they tasted amazing. I took a bite and my eyes widened. They were better than I expected. Much better. The next day, I made another batch. Then another. Soon, baking became my favorite part of the day. Every recipe felt like a challenge. Every improvement felt like a victory. One afternoon, I brought a small plate of cookies to Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who had first paid me for carrying groceries. She took one bite and immediately smiled. "Lily, these are wonderful." I blushed. "Really?" "Absolutely." She grabbed another cookie. Then a third. Before leaving, she handed me $10. I tried giving it back. "You don't have to pay." She shook her head. "Oh yes, I do." The next morning, she told 2 friends about my cookies. Those friends told others. And suddenly, people started asking if I could make more. At first, it was just cookies. Then cupcakes. Then brownies. Then birthday treats. The orders kept coming. Every evening, my kitchen filled with the smell of chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon, and fresh bread. For the first time, the giant empty house felt alive. Neighbors started stopping by regularly. Some came to buy cupcakes. Others came to buy cookies. A few simply wanted to encourage me. Everyone seemed amazed that an 11-year-old girl was running her own little baking business. One Saturday morning, I placed a small handwritten sign outside the house. "Lily's Homemade Bakery." The sign wasn't fancy. Just a piece of cardboard and a marker. But it worked. By lunchtime, several neighbors had already stopped by. By evening, nearly everything was sold out. I sat at the kitchen table counting my earnings. $20. $40. $70. Then over $100. I stared at the money in disbelief. Only a few weeks earlier, my parents had left me with $20 and expected me to survive for a month. Now I had earned several times that amount on my own. The difference was almost unbelievable. But the money wasn't what made me happiest. It was the feeling. For the first time in my life, people noticed something positive about me. They weren't praising my parents. They weren't impressed by our house. They weren't talking about wealth or status. They were talking about me. My work. My effort. My talent. That feeling was worth more than any amount of money. As the days passed, my baked goods became surprisingly popular throughout the neighborhood. People began placing orders in advance. Some customers drove in from nearby communities after hearing about the little baker. Even local businesses started asking questions. I couldn't believe it. What had started as an attempt to stay busy had become something much bigger. Something real. One evening, as I removed a tray of cupcakes from the oven, I looked around the kitchen. Flour covered the counters. Mixing bowls filled the sink. Order notes covered the refrigerator. And for the first time since my parents left, I felt excited about the future. Because I had finally discovered something special. A talent that was entirely my own. And I had no idea that this small baking business was about to attract attention far beyond our neighborhood. Attention that would soon change everything. By the 4th week, my little baking business had become something I never imagined. What started with a few homemade cookies for neighbors had turned into a steady stream of orders. Every morning, I woke up to messages from people asking for cupcakes, brownies, cookies, or cakes. The kitchen was busier than ever. And for the first time since my parents left, I wasn't worried about running out of food. I wasn't worried about money. I wasn't worried about being alone. At least, not as much. But while my baking business was growing, something else was happening. People were starting to ask questions. A lot of questions. The first person to become suspicious was Mrs. Carter, one of my former elementary school teachers. I ran into her one afternoon while delivering cupcakes. She smiled when she saw me. "Lily, what are you doing out here all by yourself?" I explained that I was delivering an order. She seemed impressed. Then she asked a simple question. "Where are your parents?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had become so used to handling everything myself that I almost forgot how strange my situation sounded. "They're in Europe." Mrs. Carter smiled. "Oh, how nice. When do they get back?" "In about a week." Her smile faded slightly. "Who's staying with you?" I hesitated. "Nobody." The moment the word left my mouth, her expression changed. She looked genuinely concerned. "What do you mean, nobody?" I explained everything. The trip. The $20. The empty house. The weeks alone. The baking business. By the time I finished, Mrs. Carter looked completely stunned. She knelt down until we were eye level. "Lily, you've been alone this entire time." I nodded. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she wrapped her arms around me. It was such a simple gesture. Yet it nearly made me cry. Because it had been a long time since an adult had shown that kind of concern. The next day, things began changing very quickly. Mrs. Carter spoke with a few neighbors. Those neighbors spoke with others. Within days, the entire community seemed to know my story. At first, I felt embarrassed. I didn't want people feeling sorry for me. I didn't want to be treated differently. But that wasn't what happened. Instead of pity, people offered support. Real support. The kind I hadn't experienced in years. Neighbors started buying more baked goods. Local businesses placed larger orders. One family ordered cookies for an entire birthday party. Another ordered cupcakes for a company event. My little baking stand became busier than ever. People weren't just buying desserts. They were investing in me. One morning, I walked outside and nearly dropped my tray of cupcakes. A line of customers was already waiting. I blinked in disbelief. "Are all of you here for cookies?" Everyone laughed. A man near the front smiled. "We heard you're the best baker in town." I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in my life, people weren't noticing me because of my parents. They were noticing me because of something I had built myself. Then came an even bigger surprise. A reporter from the local newspaper showed up at my house. At first, I thought there had been some mistake. But she introduced herself and explained that she wanted to write a story about me. Apparently, people throughout the community had been talking about the 11-year-old baker running her own business. The interview felt surreal. She asked questions about baking. About entrepreneurship. About how I started. She even took photos of me decorating cupcakes in the kitchen. A few days later, the article was published. The headline read, "Young Baker Turns Determination into Success." Seeing my picture in the newspaper felt unreal. I must have read the article 10 times. Maybe more. Soon afterward, a local television station contacted me. They wanted to feature my baking stand during a community spotlight segment. The story aired the following weekend. Neighbors gathered around their televisions. Customers stopped by to congratulate me. Even people from nearby towns started visiting. My little business grew bigger than ever. But what mattered most wasn't the publicity. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the success. It was the feeling. For years, I had felt invisible. Ignored. Forgotten. Like nobody cared whether I existed. Now, for the first time, I felt seen. Not because of my family's wealth. Not because of our house. Not because of my parents. Because of me. People respected my hard work. They admired my determination. They believed in me. And honestly, that belief changed everything. One evening, after a particularly busy day, I sat outside watching the sunset. Customers had finally gone home. The baking stand was closed. The neighborhood was quiet. As I looked around, I realized something important. A month earlier, I had been completely alone. Now, I wasn't. An entire community stood behind me. And somehow, the people who cared most about me weren't my parents. They were the neighbors, teachers, and strangers who had chosen to help. What I didn't know was that my parents would soon return from Europe. And when they did, nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to see. By the time my parents' trip was nearing its end, my life looked completely different from the day they left. 30 days earlier, I had been an 11-year-old girl standing alone in a giant empty house with $20 in my pocket and no idea how I was going to survive. Now, I was running a business. A real business. And somehow, it was working. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise. I would check orders, prepare ingredients, and start baking before most people in the neighborhood were even awake. Cookies. Cupcakes. Brownies. Mini cakes. The kitchen had become my workshop. The smell of vanilla and chocolate seemed permanently baked into the walls. What surprised me most wasn't how much work it required. It was how much I enjoyed it. For the first time in my life, I felt responsible for something important. And every successful day gave me more confidence. The money started adding up quickly. At first, it was $20. Then $50. Then $100. Soon, I had earned several $100s. Every dollar came from my own hard work. Every dollar represented a customer who believed in me. I kept careful records in a small notebook. Income. Expenses. Orders. Ingredients. Everything. The more organized I became, the more successful the business grew. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table counting my savings. The total made me stare in disbelief. I had earned more money in a few weeks than I had ever held in my life. Not because someone gave it to me. Because I earned it. That realization felt incredible. Meanwhile, the house remained spotless. I cleaned regularly. Washed dishes. Did laundry. Vacuumed floors. Took out the trash. Paid attention to every detail. Partly because I wanted things to look nice. But also because maintaining the house made me feel in control. The giant home that once frightened me now felt manageable. I wasn't just living there. I was taking care of it. Taking care of myself. And doing a pretty good job. As my customer list grew, Mrs. Carter suggested something I had never considered. You should create an online page. I blinked. An online page? She smiled. A place where people can see your products and place orders. The idea sounded intimidating. But she offered to help. Together, we created a simple page for my baking business. We uploaded photos of cookies, cupcakes, and cakes. Added prices. Shared customer reviews. And within days, orders started arriving from people I had never met. The page spread throughout the community faster than I expected. People shared it. Commented on it. Recommended it to friends. Every notification felt exciting. Every new customer felt like proof that I was building something real. One evening, while scrolling through messages, I noticed an unfamiliar name. A reporter from the local newspaper. Again. Apparently, the first article had generated a lot of interest. This time, they wanted to write a larger feature about my business. A few days later, the article was published. I nearly dropped my breakfast when I saw the headline. The Little Entrepreneur: How One Young Baker Won Over an Entire Community. I read it 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. The article talked about my determination, my baking business, my work ethic, my growing customer base, and the support I had received from the community. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. Not because of what someone else thought. Because I knew how hard I had worked to get there. Customers began bringing copies of the newspaper to my stand. Some asked for autographs as a joke. Others wanted photographs. The attention felt strange. But it also felt wonderful. Because for years, nobody had noticed me. Now people noticed everything. My effort. My talent. My persistence. One evening, as I locked up the baking stand, I looked around the neighborhood. The same streets. The same houses. The same people. Yet somehow, everything felt different. A month ago, I had felt forgotten. Now I felt valued. Respected. Appreciated. And standing there beneath the evening sky, I realized something important. I no longer needed my parents to believe in me. Because I had learned to believe in myself. What I didn't know was that my parents' flight home was already scheduled. In less than 48 hours, they would walk through that front door expecting to find the same lonely little girl they had left behind. Instead, they were about to meet someone they no longer recognized. The day my parents came home started like any other. I woke up early. Checked my online orders. Mixed cupcake batter. Prepared cookie dough. And reviewed the list of deliveries scheduled for the afternoon. By then, running the baking business felt completely normal. It was hard to believe that only a month earlier, I had been terrified and alone. Now I had customers, supporters, friends, and a growing business. Most importantly, I had confidence. Something my parents had never given me. Around noon, I received a message from my mother. Flight just landed. We'll be home soon. That was it. No questions. No concern. No how have you been? Just an update. I stared at the message for a few seconds before putting my phone away. Oddly enough, I wasn't nervous. A month ago, I would have been. But not anymore. Because I wasn't the same girl they had left behind. The house looked completely different now. The kitchen had become a bakery. Shelves were filled with baking supplies. Boxes of ingredients lined one wall. Order forms covered the refrigerator. A large whiteboard displayed customer requests and delivery schedules. Near the dining room entrance hung framed newspaper articles about my business. The biggest one featured the headline: The Little Entrepreneur: How One Young Baker Won Over an Entire Community. Every room reflected the life I had built while they were gone. The house felt alive. For the first time ever. At exactly 2:17 p.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the front window. A black SUV. My parents. They were finally home. I watched them unload expensive suitcases from the trunk. My mother wore designer sunglasses. My father looked tanned from weeks of traveling. Both were smiling. Laughing. Completely unaware of what waited inside. A moment later, the front door opened. "Hello?" My mother called. Her voice echoed through the house. I remained in the kitchen, finishing a batch of cupcakes. The smell of vanilla filled the air. My parents stepped inside. And immediately stopped. The silence was almost comical. I heard luggage drop onto the floor. Then footsteps. Slow footsteps. Confused footsteps. My father appeared first. His eyes widened. Then widened even more. Behind him, my mother entered the kitchen. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply stared. At the shelves. At the ingredients. At the equipment. At the stacks of customer orders covering the counter. "What is all this?" my father finally asked. Before I could answer, my mother's attention shifted toward the dining room wall. Toward the newspaper articles. She walked closer. Reading each headline. Looking at each photograph. Then she saw the largest article. The one featuring my picture. The one calling me the little entrepreneur. Her face turned pale. "What?" She looked back at me. Then at the article. Then back at me again. As if she couldn't process what she was seeing. My father picked up a stack of customer order forms. His eyes moved from page to page. Each sheet contained names. Addresses. Orders. Payments. There were dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The realization slowly began settling over him. Meanwhile, my mother continued staring at the wall. Her breathing became heavier. More frantic. Then she noticed something else. The online business page displayed on a laptop sitting nearby. Hundreds of followers. Dozens of reviews. New orders arriving every few minutes. That was the moment she finally broke. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with shock. And then she gasped loudly. "No. No. This can't be happening." The kitchen fell silent. My father looked equally stunned. This is your business?" I nodded. "Yes." My mother shook her head. "No." She looked around the room again. As if reality itself had become impossible. "This isn't possible." I couldn't help smiling slightly. But not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time, they were seeing me. Really seeing me. Not as a child. Not as an inconvenience. Not as someone they could ignore. As a person. A capable person. My father slowly lowered himself into a chair. Still holding the order forms. How? One simple word. Yet it carried 1,000 questions. How did you survive? How did you do this? How did you build all of this alone? I looked at both of them. Then at the house around us. The business. The newspaper articles. The evidence of everything I had accomplished. And for the first time since they left, I had an answer. A simple answer. The same way I survived the month. I paused. Then added quietly. Without you. The room became completely silent. And neither of my parents had any idea that the biggest shock was still waiting for them. Because very soon, they would discover that the entire community knew exactly what they had done. For the next few minutes, nobody said much. My parents simply stood there. Looking around the kitchen. Looking at the newspaper articles. Looking at the customer orders. Looking at me. It was as if they were seeing a completely different person. And maybe they were. The girl they left behind no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone stronger. Someone who had learned how to survive. Someone who no longer needed their approval. Finally, my father broke the silence. Lily. His voice sounded uncertain. Almost nervous. How exactly did all of this happen? I looked around the kitchen. The bakery. The order forms. The business page. The newspaper articles. Then I looked back at him. You really want to know? Both of my parents nodded. So I told them. Everything. I told them about the first night. The fear. The loneliness. The sleepless hours spent checking the front door, hoping they would come back. I told them about the nearly empty refrigerator. The panic I felt when the food started running out. I told them about teaching myself how to cook. About carrying groceries for neighbors. Walking dogs. Cleaning yards. Doing anything I could to earn money. Neither of them interrupted. Neither of them spoke. They simply listened. And the more I talked, the more uncomfortable they became. Then I told them about the baking business. The cookbook. The cookies. The first customer. The growing orders. The newspaper interviews. The online page. Everything. When I finally finished, the kitchen became silent again. My mother sat down slowly. Almost as if her legs could no longer support her. You did all that? She stared at me. By yourself? I nodded. Yes. The answer seemed to hit her harder than anything else. For the first time, she looked genuinely ashamed. Then there was a knock at the door. I smiled immediately. I knew exactly who it was. My afternoon customers. I walked over and opened the door. Standing outside was Mrs. Carter. Behind her stood several neighbors. People who had helped me during the month. People who had become my support system. The moment they saw my parents, their expressions changed. Mrs. Carter folded her arms. So. The single word carried more disappointment than anger. My parents looked confused. You must be Lily's parents. Neither neighbor smiled. Neither neighbor seemed impressed. In fact, they looked furious. My father awkwardly nodded. Yes. Mrs. Carter took a step forward. Interesting. The sarcasm was impossible to miss. My mother shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean? Another neighbor answered. It means we've been wondering when you'd finally show up. The room became tense. Very tense. My parents exchanged nervous glances. Then Mrs. Carter spoke again. Do you have any idea what your daughter has accomplished? We've seen some of it, my father replied quietly. Mrs. Carter shook her head. No. You've seen the business. You haven't seen the courage. The room fell silent. She pointed toward me. That little girl spent a month taking care of herself. She worked harder than most adults. She solved problems most children should never have to face. And she did it completely alone. My mother looked down at the floor. Unable to meet anyone's eyes. Another neighbor stepped forward. Do you know how many times we checked on her? How many people worried about her? How many nights we wondered if she was okay? Nobody answered. Because there was no answer. The truth was obvious. The community had cared more about me than my own parents. And everyone in the room knew it. Then Mrs. Carter delivered the sentence that finally shattered whatever excuses my parents still had. Every single person in this neighborhood knows what happened. Silence. Complete silence. My father's face went pale. My mother's eyes widened. You mean? Mrs. Carter nodded. Everyone knows you left an 11-year-old girl alone for an entire month. The words landed like a hammer. For the first time since returning home, my parents seemed to fully understand the situation. This wasn't a family secret. This wasn't something hidden behind closed doors. The entire community knew. The teachers knew. The neighbors knew. The local newspaper knew. Everyone knew. And none of them approved. My mother covered her face with her hands. Tears began slipping through her fingers. My father stared at the floor. Unable to look at anyone. The weight of their decision had finally become impossible to ignore. Not because people were judging them. Because they were finally judging themselves. They had spent years chasing status, respect, recognition, the opinions of strangers. Yet now the same community they wanted to impress saw them as parents who abandoned their child. And deep down, they knew those people were right. After several moments, my father finally looked at me. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Lily." His eyes filled with regret. Real regret. The kind that arrives too late. "We made a terrible mistake." For the first time since they returned, nobody argued. Nobody defended them. Nobody tried to soften the truth. Because the truth was standing right in front of us. A month earlier, they had left behind a forgotten little girl. Now they were looking at someone who had built a life without them. And perhaps the hardest realization of all was this. The reason I succeeded wasn't because they helped me. It was because I learned how to survive after they left. And finally, they understood exactly how much that should break their hearts. After the neighbors left, the house became quiet again. For a long time, nobody spoke. My parents sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I had once sat alone, wondering how I would survive the month. The same table where I had counted my last few dollars. The same table where I had planned my little business. Now, my parents sat there surrounded by evidence of everything they had missed. The newspaper articles. The customer orders. The baking supplies. The life I had built without them. Neither of them knew what to say. Because there was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to defend. The truth had already spoken. My mother finally looked up. Her eyes were red from crying. "I don't know how to fix this." Her voice trembled. "I'm so sorry, Lily." For the first time, I believed she meant it. Not because of what she said. Because of how she said it. There were no excuses. No attempts to blame anyone else. Just regret. Pure regret. My father looked older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders seemed heavier. As if the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. "We thought you'd be okay." I looked at him quietly. Then I asked the question neither of them wanted to answer. "Did you ever stop to ask if I should have been?" The room fell silent. Neither of them could answer. Because they already knew the truth. No 11-year-old should have been left alone. No child should have had to figure everything out by themselves. No child should have felt forgotten. My mother began crying again. This time harder than before. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. A month earlier, I probably would have been. But something had changed. The loneliness had changed me. The challenges had changed me. The responsibility had changed me. I wasn't the same little girl anymore. And somehow, I had found peace with that. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up the $20 bill. The same one my mother had left behind. I had kept it the entire month. Not because I needed it. Because it reminded me of where everything started. I placed it on the table in front of them. My parents stared at it. Then at me. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, I smiled softly. Not out of happiness. Out of understanding. Then I said the words that had been sitting in my heart for weeks. "I stopped waiting for you to take care of me." The sentence was simple. But it changed everything. My mother's face immediately crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. My father lowered his head. Neither of them could look at me. Because they understood exactly what those words meant. It wasn't about food. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about being alone. It was about trust. The trust every child places in their parents. The belief that no matter what happens, someone will be there. Someone will care. Someone will protect them. And somewhere along the way, that trust had disappeared. Not because of one mistake, but because of a choice. A choice they made when they put their lives ahead of their daughter. My father wiped his eyes. Then spoke quietly. "We thought we'd only be gone for a month." I nodded. "I know." His voice cracked. "But now I realize we lost something much bigger." For the first time all day, I saw complete honesty in his eyes. Not defensiveness. Not pride. Just sadness. My mother reached across the table. Not trying to justify herself. Not trying to erase the past. Simply reaching out. "Lily, can you ever forgive us?" I thought carefully before answering. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Finally, I nodded. Yes. Both of them looked surprised. Relieved. Hopeful. But before they could say anything, I continued. "I forgive you." I paused. But some things take time to rebuild. The relief on their faces mixed with pain. Because they understood exactly what I meant. Forgiveness was possible. Trust would be harder. And trust, once broken, never returns overnight. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then my father looked around the kitchen one last time. At the business. At the newspaper articles. At everything I had accomplished. And tears filled his eyes again. Not because he was proud. Although he was. Because he realized something heartbreaking. He had missed it all. The first cookie. The first customer. The first dollar earned. The first newspaper article. The first moment I believed in myself. He wasn't there for any of it. Neither of them were. And those moments could never be repeated. As the sun began setting outside, the golden light filled the kitchen. For the first time in a month, we sat together as a family. Not a perfect family. Not a healed family. But a family beginning to understand what truly mattered. And in that moment, my parents finally learned the lesson they should have known all along. Success isn't measured by money. Or vacations. Or social status. It's measured by the people who trust you. The people who love you. The people who need you. And if you neglect those people long enough, you may eventually discover that what you've lost is far more valuable than anything you gained. Final moral. Children don't need perfect parents. They need present parents. And sometimes, the greatest loss isn't the time you spend away. It's the trust you lose while you're gone.